So when your dog bites somebody, being a bite attorney, it doesn't mean that your dog is immediately going to be put down and taken to the pound.
Okay. No, it doesn't mean that. First of all, there are two kinds of bites. There are justified bites, and then there are the ones that indicate aggression and a violent predisposition.
All right, Ken, thank you so much for hopping on the No Bad Dogs podcast. I am super excited to have you on. I was a dog control officer before. I'm a professional, a dog lover of forever, and you are the top of your game in what you do. Please introduce yourself, and I can't wait to ask you all the fun questions I got loaded up for you.
Sure. I'm attorney Kenneth M. Phillips. I'm the author of dogbitelaw.com, which is a 1,100-page treatise on the interactions of people and dogs and the legal aspects of that. I aimed the website when the website has been online since the late 90s. In the late 90s, there was no such thing as dog bite law. That was a phrase that I came up with. In the late 90s, when I came up with it and started saying that I was a dog bite lawyer, it was regarded as being a joke because people never heard of dog bite law. They never heard of dog bite lawyer. And in fact, in the late 90s, the average number of people being killed by dogs in the U.S. was 6 or 7. And dog attacks were not in the news because it just wasn't a thing. So I came along at that time. I introduced dog bite law as being a thing. And you know, like the rest is history. So in addition to my being the only lawyer in the United States who does nothing but dog attack cases, 99% of the time for the victim, 1% of the time for the dog owner or other defendant. In addition to that, I also have written laws that have been enacted on the state level on down around the country. I have testified about laws in the legislative arena. I have given webinars and seminars for attorneys and dog owners and canine professionals like animal control officers. So I do all this stuff. It's what I do. So that's who I am.
Yeah.
I'll just add my law practice. I'm in Beverly Hills, California, but my law practice is nationwide. Literally, I've appeared in cases all over the United States.
And what do you? I think most dog owners think, and this was the case when I was a DCO as well, that if your dog bites somebody, the dog catcher is going to come, remove the dog, and your dog's going to be put down. And that's not the case. There's multiple steps that have to happen. I know in New York State, it's the dog. You have to go to court and you have to talk about these things, and it has to be deemed a dangerous dog. And even if your dog does be deemed a dangerous dog, it doesn't mean the dog is going to be put down. There's a lot of steps. It's actually in New York anyway. It is pretty difficult to get a dog to be put down, like by a court order, from what I have seen in the area that I'm in. But every single the interesting thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is every county is a little bit different in what the laws say. But I know New York State ag laws are pretty much the same statewide. What do you see the most of? I mean, when people contact you and email you, what are you seeing the most of, and what's your first line of defense?
Okay, all right. So with regard to where you started, which is, are dogs getting put down if they bite somebody? The answer is absolutely not. It almost never happens. It's distressing that it almost never happens because distressing for a couple of reasons. I'll give you one reason. When a woman named Diane Whipple was killed by dogs in San Francisco a couple of decades ago, one of the 2 dogs that was involved was put down. The other was kept alive in a cage as an item of evidence for a year or a year and a half, which wasn't fair for the dog because it was a very big dog. It was a Presa Canario. I wish that people would not worry about what happens to the dog because really that's not, usually nothing happens to the dog. the purpose of the dangerous dog laws is really, it really has more to do with the irresponsible dog owner than with the bad dog, because it's almost always it's almost always the fault of a person when a dog attacks somebody. So when somebody contacts me and they say that there's been a dog attack, usually it's the victim or the victim's family, the parents, for example. The first thing I'm looking for is, well, first of all, why are they calling an attorney? Because sometimes people are bitten by dogs and it's nothing, you know. I mean, like they're upset, but it's just it's a little bite, and like it's not. I don't get involved in little tiny bites. I just can't. You know, there are over 5 million dog bite victims in the U.S. per year. So, you know, I mean, most of those are little. There's about 1 million people per year who have to go to to see a doctor as a result of a dog bite. There's about 400,000 per year in the U.S. that have to go to the emergency room because of a dog bite. So those are the real serious cases. So when somebody contacts me and they say that there's been a dog attack, the question in my mind is, you know, like, how bad is it? And then I look to what caused it. You know, what was the reason for it? The laws about this, we can get into that in a second, but the overview is that the laws are basically negligence laws. So in other words, if this is something that you should have seen coming and you were the dog owner, you really should have seen this coming for one reason or another. Either because you're allowing your dog to run around the neighborhood every day when it's time for the dog to take a poop, or because you have your dog on a leash that's 60 feet long and people can be tripped on it, or because you're letting your dog run around in a daycare center with a lot of screaming 5-year-olds. You know, you should have foreseen it. That's the basic standard. So it's people. So I'm looking, when I hear about a dog attack, I'm looking at, you know, what did the people do wrong?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point of my podcast and my whole message is, you know, 9 times out of 10, if there's any type of issue with the dog, it's because somebody made a mistake. And that's almost always what I see in training and behavior. And so once somebody contacts you and you say, okay, this individual or this victim had to go to the emergency room and get some stitches, because I have seen over the years of working with dogs, whether it's in our own daycare, in our own training center, whether it's me, a lot of times people, especially trainers or professionals, are like, yeah, this was my fault, or mess with the bull, you get the horns. I was working with this aggressive dog. The dog bit me. And a lot of times we go to the emergency room to get flushed out, to get cleaned out, and to get a round of antibiotics. And we just say, oh, it was a friend's dog, or we were breaking up a fight, because those are the realities, because of course we're not trying to get the dog or even the person into trouble. But I think so walk me through that process. Is each state going to be different? I know New York State, typically Department of New York State Health, Department of, Department of Health essentially will make a report. Make a report to animal control within the county, and then animal control typically, not always, sometimes it doesn't happen, they will contact the dog owner and typically will go and do a 10-day quarantine in the owner's property. So again, I think maybe a lure of the dog being taken by the dog catcher and being thrown in the back of the thing and then being dumped at the shelter and being held there on like imprisonment. In New York State, that's not how it goes. The dog is typically, animal control will come out, make sure the dog isn't rabid. The dog has to do a 10-day quarantine. So that means the dog has to be confined and let out on the leash to go potty, back in, and then back into confinement. And so can you explain if that's the case for most states, and why is that process important?
Okay. So, here's the layout, because you covered a few issues. First of all, it depends on who got bit by the dog, because like, if it was some child who was out playing who got bit by the dog, that's one thing. If it's a trainer or any other canine pro, such as a dog walker, that's regarded differently. If it's a veterinarian or a vet tech, that's regarded differently.
In
Some
what
people
way?
work with, well, because some people are in an occupation where it is known that they might get bit, and so they are considered in the law, whether it's fair or not. And incidentally, I'm not so sure it's fair, but they're almost considered like Hollywood stunt people. Like if you're a canine pro, a trainer, for example, and you're working with an aggressive dog, and the dog just takes you out. I mean, just mauls you horribly. In most places, you're not going to be able to get anything for that. You're not going to be able to go against your own client, even if they knew that the dog was a dangerous dog. Heck, that's why you were working with that dog, because that dog was an aggressive dog. So there's that problem.
You mean
which is
monetarily speaking? Like get anything? You mean financially?
okay, on both sides, yeah. Financially, on the side of the person who is injured, and then in terms of the law enforcement angle, there's not very much sympathy, if any. In terms of the courts, not much sympathy, if any sympathy. So they're not going to necessarily do anything against the dog, because you were there to discipline the dog, train the dog. You were there. You were working with a dog that was known to be a problem. So that's really one issue that's come up for me. I don't want to derail. I don't want to go on a detour right now. But the people that are really getting the shaft are the rover people, the dog sitters. They are really getting the shaft right now, because they're being lumped in with the trainers and the veterinarians. And so when they're just sitting for some old lady's dog and they're getting bitten, or getting some other type of injury, they're being compensation for them, including just getting their medical bills paid, is getting ruled out completely. So that's bad. Let me go back to your question, because you were asking me about the process when a dog bites somebody. So we start out looking at who was it that was bitten and what are the circumstances. Was it a kid playing? Was it a dog trainer who was working with a bad dog? From there should be a report, and it should be an accurate report. Like you mentioned, we may go to the hospital and we may say that it was a friend's dog. I have had a lot of cases where the victim is very concerned about the dog, doesn't want the dog put down, doesn't want to make any enemies in the neighborhood or among relatives. And as a result, they go and they say it was a stray dog, and we don't know whose dog it was. That's doing themselves a disservice, and it is doing the community a disservice, because even if you think that I'm not really sure why that dog bit me, the animal control people might have a history on that dog. This may be the third or fourth time something has happened with that dog, and it may be an escalating thing. So I always tell people, report it, because probably nothing's going to happen anyway to the dog or the dog owner. I mean, it's like I said before, it's distressing that there aren't enough animal control officers, and there's not enough I'll call it prosecution, although it's not necessarily criminal. It could be just like a civil administrative type of proceeding where the dog owner is asked to sign a bunch of conditions, like you will keep your dog muzzled, or you will make sure that the fence around your property it doesn't have any more holes in it, that kind of thing. So all right, so there's the first issue, who did it happen to? What are the circumstances? Then there's the report thing. Let me tell you something about the report that happens at the hospital, because this is something really important that people need to know about. That report at the hospital that is supposedly about the dog biting is really an epidemiological report. It has to do with rabies. It does not have to do with dangerous dogs. So when the hospital takes the report, it's kind of a crapshoot as to whether anybody in the animal control world will ever even hear that it happened.
Right.
The state veterinarian is going to get those figures at some point, but that's for a whole different reason. It's to determine whether or not there's a rabies outbreak in the state. Basically, that's what it boils down to. So the next thing that you mentioned is the so-called the dangerous dog laws themselves and the proceedings. They are mostly non-criminal. They're like 99% of them are non-criminal. And so it's a matter of being cited into the dog court, which is what a lot of people call it. That's what I call it, dog court. You're cited in, and there's a proceeding in which evidence is taken, and you're allowed to speak. You're allowed to bring in your witnesses, and you're allowed to plead for mercy and that kind of thing. And they will usually put conditions on keeping the dog. They'll say, look, you never got a license for this dog, so you got to keep it licensed. That's number one. Number two, your dog was not microchipped. It needs to be microchipped. Number three, your dog wasn't vaccinated. Get your dog vaccinated and keep it up to date. Number four, you had no insurance, and therefore you have no way of paying for whatever the damages are. And that's something, Tom, we should talk about a little bit at some point, because that's awfully important for dog owners to know about. The whole, well, what insurance do you need and what to watch out for. But in any event, in the context of your question, so the last step is that administrative type proceeding called dog court, and probably what will happen is, dog owner is going to be there are going to be some conditions imposed on the dog owner, like have the insurance in the future, control your dog in the future, and obey the laws having to do with keeping your dog on a leash, keeping your dog on your property. Don't let it run around by itself. Sometimes muzzling the dog if the dog did something bad. So that's usually how it goes.
Yeah, and I want to just clarify on a lot of the bites that we see, especially in daycare, because that's honestly where it happens the most. It's a person breaking up play that's borderlining and flirting with fighting, and we're breaking it up, and then as they're breaking it up, they get nipped. Or I've even had staff play with dogs and get nipped, and they have to go. And so that's what I meant by that. That a lot of times they will just say, "Oh, it was a, whatever," just because it was. I mean, I've seen that with smaller dogs. They will play and then, somebody gets nipped. But you talked about de-escalation. Now, in your field, do you feel like it's like people where they get arrested once for possession or whatever, and then now they're kind of like a seasoned criminal, if you will? Do you see that often, that if a dog is aggressive or has a bite history, that dog has multiple bites? Is that something that escalates often, or if they bite one person, then it typically is a multi-bite thing?
I think once the dog's, let me answer it this way. Once the dog bites a person or shows some kind of aggression toward people, like, for example, kind of mounting a person or coming up to a person, putting the paws on the person's shoulders and staring the person in the face. Once the dog starts doing stuff like that, I look at it, Tom, I look at it kind of backwards chronologically. In other words, when I get a dog attack case, I say, when did the dog do this in the past? When did the dog behave aggressively toward people? When did the dog start dominating people? When did the dog start playing rough? When did the dog start banging on the window to get out when it saw a person coming up the path? I don't know that there's ever been any reliable study of what maybe we would call recidivism in dogs. In other words, an escalation of aggression toward people. I don't know that that's ever been done. As a common sense thing, and from my perspective, it's always there. Once I see that there was a bite, and this is something that I tell attorneys, because attorneys hire me to mentor them in difficult cases. And sometimes they won't be able to find a prior act of aggression. So they won't be able to say there was negligence. They won't be able to say that the dog owner should be held strictly liable because the dog had previously bitten somebody. That's the old one bite rule. And so they'll say to me, what do I do? I'm about to give up on the case. And I will always counsel them that if the dog has bitten somebody, there is something in the dog's past. So from my point of view, as somebody who's done serious attack cases since the 1990s, the answer is yes. There is some kind of an escalation. But has there been a reliable scientific type study? That I don't know.
Mm. Yeah, I was just curious if you see, when you deal with these cases, if you see a dog that has one bite and then another and then another and then another. I didn't know if that was a common thing that you saw.
Well, let me give you this bit of information. In 1/3 of the states, it is, in order for there to be liability, civil liability, and probably everywhere in order for there to be criminal liability, there has to be evidence that the dog previously either bit somebody or acted like it wanted to bite somebody. So to that extent, yeah, I see it all the time. I'm looking for it all the time. I'm also looking for other things, which is, how did the person screw up? How can I say that they were negligent for what happened? That's another thing that I'm looking for. But yeah, I mean, you're on target. You're on target because you're saying, what do we do with the dog that has already bitten somebody? And from my point of view, what I tell people is that if you have a dog like that has shown an aggressive tendency toward people or has bitten somebody, you are at risk. You're not only at risk for serious civil liability, you are at risk for being hit with a civil judgment and not being able to declare bankruptcy, so you never get out of it. So it's almost like Dickensian. The judgment follows you around your whole life. And the other thing is that if you have that kind of a dog, you're looking at the potential of criminal prosecution and jail time. Think about it. That Whipple case that I mentioned, the one where the woman was killed in the hallway of her apartment building by a couple of Presa Canario dogs. Those dogs had never bitten anybody before. And I've had other cases where there was a criminal prosecution and the dogs had never bitten anybody before, but they sure did act like they were going to bite somebody. So we're always looking at that history of aggression. And I find that in the cases that I handle, that which are the more serious dog bite cases, yes, there is that aggression in the past.
And what do you, so when your dog bites somebody, being a bite attorney, it doesn't mean that your dog is immediately going to be put down and taken to the pound.
Okay. No, it doesn't mean that. First of all, there are two kinds of bites. There are justified bites, and then there are the ones that indicate aggression and a violent predisposition. So there are two kinds of bites. So that's the first thing to separate. I mean, if you wake the dog up, if you take the puppy, if you pull the food away, those are illegally, those are considered, if the dog bites you, those are considered justified bites. So there's nothing that's going to happen to you as a dog owner or to you criminally or administratively.
And then the unjustified bites.
Well, the unjustified bites, I would say probably 98% of the time, nothing is going to happen to the dog directly. I mean, the dog is going to be put in quarantine, but that's for your benefit as the dog owner. That dog better be put into quarantine, because if that person dies as a result of rabies, and you are so toast. You are so toast. So you need to know whether that dog has rabies. So the quarantine, it's for your benefit as well as the dog bite victims. So, okay, to that extent, something happens to the dog. But most of these dog quarantines are in your own home. They're in the dog owner's home. And all they're saying is, don't let that dog be around any other animals. They don't want the dog to go outside, incidentally, because there could be some raccoon out there. There could be something out there where the dog gets rabies. So we need to know whether or not the dog, was rabid at the time that it bit the person. But usually, unfortunately, I would say, nothing happens one way or the other because there aren't enough animal control officers. There's not enough budget to really make a dent that way. The dent has to be made other ways.
So I'm assuming that when a dog bites somebody, we are quarantining to know that the dog isn't rabid or showing like real Cujo signs. All of a sudden they're starting to act crazy and completely out of character. But what you're saying is so let me ask you this then: when a dog dog bites somebody, we quarantine them to make sure that they don't have rabies. What's the 10-day quarantine about? Then after, like within that 10-day period, does it mean that we would see clear signs of the dog being rabid, foaming at the mouth, and trying to kill everything? I mean,
yep.
I don't understand.
That's it. You just said it. And within the 10 days, the dog appears rabid and, in fact, keels over and dies. And then what they do is they take the dog, they do a post-mortem on the dog. They send its head to a lab to determine, was it rabies that killed this dog? That's what it's all about. It's not about anything else.
How often do you see that happen? I've never heard of a rabies case ever. I know it happens, but okay.
Neither have I. Yeah, it hasn't ever happened because rabies is very well controlled in the USA today. So I never see it happen. But so that doesn't. It's not like it doesn't happen just because I haven't seen it. I mean, because it does happen, but it's never come up for me. And I've been doing these cases since the early '90s.
Right, so. You're the guy people call when a bite happens, and if you haven't seen it since the '80s, it does happen, but it's slim pickings. It sounds like. Okay, so that's one thing I wanted to get into. You mentioned the financial backing and support in the budget for animal control or dog control. And I'll tell you this, when I was probably 23, 24, maybe, I can't remember, my early 20s, the town that I was living in at the time was hiring for a dog control officer. And they didn't have an ACO, an animal control officer, because that was like too way big of a budget. But here's kind of the interesting thing about a dog control officer job. And just to give people context, the difference between an ACO and a DCO is a DCO just does dogs and an ACO does everything. So when I applied for the position, I said, look, I had a dog walking company at the time. I was just all over the area just working dogs, and people would call me if there's an off-leash dog, or people would call me if there's an HBC, a hit by car. So I kind of went in and I said, guys, I live here, small town. I do this for a living. I'm comfortable with dogs. I'm passionate. I'd love to help. They hired me, and I remember when I got into it, they didn't give me any training. They didn't give me any equipment. They basically gave me a cell phone. They gave me a thing to write tickets, court appearances, and that was it. And they basically said, just make sure you take really good notes, because when you do appear in court, we need to have all the notes. Like any other law enforcement, that's why they take out their pen and paper. They have to document as much as they can. That's most of their job is paperwork. And so I remember getting into it, and I called one of the other local DCOs, and I said, I don't know what I'm doing. I know how to help dogs, and I know how to, and it would get a call. It would be like, hey, my dog I had this one case, I'll never forget it. And I'm really happy that I didn't do this for long, because to be completely honest, it was so depressing and so sad. So I get these calls, and a call for me being a dog control officer back then was, hey, my dog just killed my cat. Or, hey, my neighbor's dog just killed my cat. and then or whatever. And so I'd have to go, and people would be crying and their beloved cat in a box, and then there's the dog over there with the neighbor, and they're all upset, and it was a nightmare. I was like, this is awful. I don't want to work with dogs at this capacity. I feel and I give so much support and respect to ACOs and DCOs and any law enforcement, because they're getting called on everyone else's problems all day long. And it's a really tough job. And so I just remember not really being told what to do. And I called this ACO and I said, what do I do? And he said, well, get out your, this equipment and this equipment. I said, I don't have this equipment. And he's like, you're kidding me. I said, no. He said, you don't have a catch pole. Yeah. He's like, you don't have bite gloves. You don't have, I said, no. He's like, do you have a badge? I said, no. He's like, what? He was like mortified. He's like, because he's like, you need a badge. You need some sort. And I remember I was like, well, they gave me this little card. It was like, like a cafeteria lady's like ID card. And it was like this cheap little thing. And he said, what if you're chasing an HBC, or what if you're chasing a RA running at large through somebody's property and they shoot you because you don't have a badge, or you don't have any identification or anything that kind of tells you that you are, even though you're low end of the totem pole of a dog control officer, you are going on somebody's property to ask them about a dog or ask them about whatever. You need to be very heavily represented. They said, did they give you a vehicle? I said, no. So I remember I went back to, and he told me what to say. He said, go back to the town and tell him this. And I did, and I'll never forget this. She looked at me and she goes, who have you been talking to? And I said, nobody. This is well before ChatGPT and AI. So, because he told me, he said, you need to go tell them this, because it's in New York State ag laws that the ACO and the DCO, they need proper equipment to do their job. And I told them this, and she looked at me very like condescending. She said, who have you been talking to? And I said, nobody. And a week later I was fired. And so yeah. And I was like, thank God, honestly, it was awful. And I remember calling the ag lead, the support, the number one, I don't know, the agricultural department leader, right? She called me. Her name was Mrs. Holmes. She called me and she said, please tell me that they offered you your job back. And I said, no. She goes, do you want to file? Like, this is illegal. They basically let you go because you pressed them on things that they weren't doing legally, right? And
it's called being a whistleblower.
Oh, okay. That's what I was then.
And incidentally, this would be called an unlawful termination.
Yep.
And you would be able to sue if you wanted the job. I mean,
And at the time I didn't. I was just so like, I liked helping dogs, but it came with so much responsibility. And they gave me, I think it was $200 a week or something. Like I mean, it was nothing, like literally nothing. And it was awful. So anyway, that was like my experience with that. But why is the dog control and the animal control budgets so low when local law enforcement call on them all the time? I remember state troopers and sheriffs would call me every day. Hey, there's if there was a dog hit by a car on the side of the road, they'd have to call me. And if I was on the other side of town or not around, because we didn't have a backup. So it was like, why? Do you have any idea why that is?
Yeah, the people who prepare the budgets are putting their money into other things. It's that simple, and we're all paying more and more every year. The taxes are going up, and the problems are either staying the same or getting worse. And we're not getting our money's worth as taxpayers. I abhor what goes on with regard to animal control. And it's not the fault of the animal control officers, not at all. I had a case recently where the city picked up a dog. The animal control officer picked up a dog. The dog had attacked a guy in the street. It was a pit bull. It was the little pit bulls, the ones that sometimes are called gargoyle type pit bulls, tiny, stocky little dog. So it had attacked a guy in the street, and it had bitten both of his arms. He happened to be a military policeman, so he had all kinds of training as to how to control the dog, because they have to deal with that. He controlled the dog. He actually captured the dog. The animal control officer came out, took a report, saw the wounds, the whole thing, went back and did his paperwork, said the dog was vicious and do not let anybody come and take this dog. And if they try, talk to me or another animal control officer, and let's hold a hearing. And of course, the purpose of the hearing in that case would be to give a notice out to the public that if this is your dog, come and defend the dog, and otherwise the dog is going to be put down because it was so severe. Well, the people in the shelter probably being scared to death of this dog, the minute it came out of the 10-day quarantine, I mean the minute, they put it up for adoption. And they told people that this was a great dog. And when a guy came in with his 14-year-old daughter, looking at the dog because he liked that kind of a dog. He liked the look of the little gargoyle type pit bull. They said this was a very sweet dog. They said, we're going to miss him. And he took the dog, and
Oh, God.
within 3 months, the dog chewed off his mother's arm.
No
Chewed it off.
way.
Chewed it off. I thought of this as you were talking for a couple of reasons. First of all, the animal control officer was doing his job, no doubt about it. It was the people in the shelter and the policies of the shelter that were the real problem there. I mean, huge problem. I mean, that was fraud and deception. That was criminal what they did. The woman was 72 years old. I got her a $7.5 million settlement with the city. And so I did a good job for her. But it leaves the problem that you alluded to, which is, what about what's going on with animal control? Well, it's a two-part thing. One is the officer and the dog catcher. The other is what's going on with the shelters and their policies about keeping the dogs. How do they keep the dogs? How do they confine them? How do they feed them? Do they walk them enough? Do they treat them well? And then what do they do with the dogs? Because the shelters for the last, 15 years or so have been flooded with dogs to the point where a lot of shelters will not take a dog. If you bring a dog in, even if the dog has bitten somebody, and you say, I want to get rid of this dog, I can't keep this dog, they'll say, make an appointment. Come back later. Come back later. One guy brought in a dog that had attacked somebody in his family, and the people at the shelter said, make an appointment, come back later. And the guy took out a knife and started stabbing the dog because he said, I can't take this dog. You guys got to take the dog. And he just lost his mind, started killing the dog right in front of them. But he didn't kill the dog. The dog was saved. The guy went to jail, but the dog was saved. But it's a two-part problem. So why aren't they devoting more resources to it? Why don't they devote more resources to a whole lot of other things that they're not devoting resources to? It's that problem. It's not just a problem with animals and dogs. It's across the board. It's the potholes in the road. It's the homeless people that are sleeping in the doorways. How do we solve these problems? Is it impossible to solve them? No. But resources have to be applied effectively. And you got to have more animal control officers. You've got to have shelter policies that promote a proper, let's say, proper confinement and proper moving along of the dogs through the system. So it's a big problem. It's not just money. But it's definitely not the animal control officers or the dog catchers. It's not them. It's not them. They are good people.
Yeah, and that's, for me, I was a young 20-something-year-old guy who wanted to help my community in any way I could. They didn't pay me anything. They made me use my own vehicle. And when I confronted them on the lack of training and equipment, they fired me. And I was like, okay. And then so it's just really... It's sad, but it's like anything else in politics, right? It's like, why aren't, X, Y, and Z, and it's like, where's the money going? And why aren't these people getting it, and it stinks. What is the number one reason why dogs bite, in your opinion, that you see?
It's always because of a mistake by a person. Always. There are some dogs that are bad dogs. Okay, despite the name of your show, there are some dogs that are bad dogs. There are Cujo dogs; they are out there, are all pit bulls bad dogs? No. Are all dogs of a certain breed bad dogs? No, they're not. There are there are people. There are loads and loads of people that probably shouldn't have dogs, or children for that matter, but let's just focus on the dogs. There are
Yeah.
people that they don't have the time, they don't have the temperament, and they don't have the knowledge, and they're not trainers. Maybe they've watched Caesar Milan and they think they have to be the alpha, and so they're cruel to the dog. Maybe they keep the dog on the roof. Lots of people keep the dog on the roof.
On the
Believe
roof.
it or not, on the roof.
What do you
A
mean?
lot of
What do you mean?
on the roof of the house. On the roof of the house. That's where the dog lives. He lives on the roof. Lots of
That's
people do
insane.
that.
I've never heard that.
Okay, so there are dog
insane.
hoarders. There are dog hoarders. There are people that have 50 dogs or 150 dogs, and these dogs are chained up somewhere. So those are the aberrations. But usually, what it is that I see is an ignorant dog owner. They have the dog on a leash that is a retractable leash. First of all, that's not legal. In any city where there's a leash law, the retractable leash is not legal. Okay,
Wow.
so that's a violation right there.
Really?
Yes, there are many laws throughout the country that prohibit tethering or chaining a dog to a tree or a fence, because that is considered to be, number one, inhumane. Number two, it raises the likelihood that the dog is going to lash out at somebody and bite them. So there are a lot of people don't know about that, but that's a problem. Chaining the dog, keeping him tied up, especially keeping him tied up where people are passing by. There are people who will ignore the fact that the dog has a problem. I had one case where the dog bit a little girl on the face, and it was the uncle's dog that bit the little girl on the face, and the little girl and the dog knew each other. So why? And the dog was a golden retriever of all things. They don't bite anybody. So why did it happen? And nobody helped me out on it. I had to file a lawsuit, which nobody wanted me to do, so I could take the deposition of the dog owner, because the insurance company was saying, yeah, you can't talk to the dog owner. And as a lawyer, I'm not allowed to do that. I'm not allowed to just go and try to get people to incriminate themselves. So it turned out, after questioning the dog owner, that the dog had an ear infection, and he had the family, the visiting family, come over to the house, and he knew the kids were going to play with the dog, but he never warned them that the dog has the ear infection. Don't play with the dog's ear because the dog is hurting. And that's what the girl did. All she did was pet the dog on the ear. Boom, she got bit. So the short answer to your question is that what I mostly see is a person screwing up, making a mistake that they shouldn't have made, and that puts the dog in a situation that the dog should not have been in. It could be that it was a dog known to be aggressive. Well, why did you let it encounter people as you walked down the street? Why did you do that? I mean, we had this thing that happened in New York a few months, I guess maybe it was about 6 months ago. Two people were walking a couple of pit bulls that were known to go after other people's dogs. And here they are walking down somewhere I believe it was on the east side, where everybody's sitting around with their coffee and they've got their dogs on leashes and things like that. And some couple walks by with a little Chihuahua, and the dog that was known to go after other dogs went after this little Chihuahua right in the middle of the street, and it caused like a riot, and all kinds of consequences have flowed from it, including some proposals to change the laws of New York, which are ridiculous because the laws of New York are complicated enough and they fully apply to that situation already. So there's no need to change anything. But what I'm saying is that it's people that should have known better, people who ignored a problem, people who maybe shouldn't have a dog to begin with. That's usually it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad that those things happen. And I think there's also, going to the no bad dogs thing, and I've talked about this a couple different times, and I think it's important for people to know and understand, like, of course, there are dogs who start to develop aggression because of their genetics or because of their wiring in their brain. There's absolutely that. The No Bad Dogs whole brand and the trademark that I've spent tons of money and time on trademarking is really just to advocate for dogs who, to what your situation was with the little kid and the golden retriever. Not necessarily with bites, but mostly the No Bad Dogs is because I'm a trainer. Most people come in and they say, "Hey, my dog's a jerk. Look at him." And I said, "Actually, you have no idea how to communicate." 99.9.
You're the jerk. You're the jerk, not the dog. Yeah.
Right. And that's what the No Bad Dogs whole slogan and brand and trademark and podcast and everything is I've built it around, if there's a training issue with a dog, chances are it's the person. But there are like these outlier genetics that definitely play a role. And in most cases, dogs start to mature and then all of a sudden start to turn into this different dog. I mean, I've seen it with my clients' dogs, and it's sad because they didn't do anything wrong. The owner, like, they've done everything right. They've done the training. And then all of a sudden, the dog hits a certain age and just, I mean, I had a Saint Bernard who did something similar, not with people ever, but I remember he used to be in doggy daycare. And when he turned like 4 years old, he just stopped liking dogs, like bang, out of nowhere. And it was like, okay, this is it. And then, we managed it for the rest of his life until he passed away, and that was it. But there were the first couple dogs that he had bad interactions with, like, really, it was like, why would you let this big giant dog go up to this small dog? It's like because he's done it 100 times. He's never, so I think that that's a real thing too, where dogs all of a sudden, and I've seen it in injury and illness and pain, and I've also just seen a dog's genetics start to change, where as they mature, they all of a sudden, they are outliers, to be clear. Like, these dogs are outliers. These are dogs who, it's not common. It's not common, but it does happen because I've dealt with it myself. Like, all of us, my dog who used to be, again, I never did, but I could bring him to a dog park and he would play and have fun, and he never had an issue with dogs. And then one day he met a little dog and he went after the little dog, and I was like, and I remember the owner looking at me like, "What the heck?" And I'm like, I don't know. This was years and years and years ago, but yeah, and then after that, it was just so I do see that happening too. Now, talking about genetics and talking about different dogs, like, I know that you mentioned pit bulls a couple times and Presa Canarios and these big dogs, these big tough dogs, and my experience with pit bulls, like, I always tell people, my two favorite dog breeds to train are pit bulls and labs because they'll do anything you want. And the problem with pit bulls doing everything you want is because of their loyalness and their athleticism and their strength. A lot of times people start turning those dogs south and start getting them to do bad things. And, they do have a history of being aggressive with dogs and breeders wanting them to fight. I mean, that's like the number one dog for fighting rings. And so that's what I see as a trainer. I'm not going to talk like I'm a pit bull expert, because I'm not, but I do know that a lot of dogs that I see are poorly bred, bad, poor genetic pit bulls, which are terriers, which I do know as a professional and as an expert that terriers are chase and prey driven machines. That's what they're bred for. And I think that with poor genetics, they get put into a shelter because of X, Y, and Z, and then they get adopted out, and then something happens. I just see that for the breed over and over again, and it is unfortunate and it's sad. But in your experience, like, have you seen particular breeds that have been more predominant in bite cases or in other cases?
Okay. All right. So let's start with pit bulls because that's the dog that is in the news a lot. Pit bulls cause a huge amount of damage, and probably, I know for a fact that more than half the time it's completely unexpected based on the particular dog's history. Now, how do I know that? Because of a very horrible statistic, which is that when a pit bull turns violent toward a human being, it most of the time the victim is the owner of the pit bull or a member of the owner's family. Okay, so when I hear that there's been a pit bull attack, because I get notifications on the news and people send me messages, I can bet and win most of the time that this is just a family member that got taken out by the pit bull. So pit bulls are a bit of a problem. Now you mentioned genetics, so let me say something about the pit bull genetics. First of all, any dog that has been created to do a certain thing is going to do that thing. And so in other words, if you get a pointer, it's going to point. If you get, like you mentioned, a terrier, terriers. There are dogs that, the retrievers, they retrieve. It's not like you have to train them to do it. They just automatically do it. Pit bulls were created by mankind for a very bad purpose, which is to entertain people in a blood sport. That's why they were called pit bulls. The history of it is very interesting. There were dogs that the butchers used to hold the bulls and control the bulls, and the butchers used them for that. People took those dogs and started doing bear baiting, and bear baiting was a sport up until around the time of the American Civil War, and it was all over the place. And bear baiting was you drive a stake into the ground, you handcuff the bear, one of the limbs of the bear, to the stake, and then you have dogs attack the bear, and you sit and you
That's
watch
insane.
and you bet. Yeah, that's bear baiting, and it became illegal about the time of the American Civil War in England and here in the U.S. So the people that had those dogs and who wanted the entertainment thought, well, what should we do with those dogs? Oh, let's dig a pit and have the dogs fight each other. And so that was the fighting type pit bull. Now, let me say something about the fighting pit bull, because this is not going where you think it's going. If you were to delve into the pit bull of today, the dogs that are used for fighting today, that are used for gambling and that type of thing, you'll find something that is you wouldn't expect, which is that the people that are into those dogs, that have, let's say their family has been into it for 5 generations, they call themselves the dog men. They'll be the first ones to say that what they feel is the real pit bull is a dog that would never turn on anybody, would never hurt anybody, would never hurt its owner, would always be obedient, but is a ferocious fighter and gladiator. And they will say, because I have gone there and I have seen them say it, that the pit bull that you see in the city that is a weird color and has one eye one color, another eye the other color, and has the ears floppy and that type of thing, they'll say that's not the real pit bull. That's the city pit bull, that where the genetics have been all screwed up so that what you have is a dog that is unpredictable. And that's the problem with pit bulls, that they're unpredictable. So when we talk about, are there bad dogs and genetics and things like that, yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem for the pit bull. The pit bull is the most abused of all dogs. We think of the pit bull as the mall or the one that will hurt people the most. Yeah, okay, that is true. The worst bites are by the pit bulls. The highest hospital bills, the longest hospital stays, the most surgeries, the most disfigurements, and by far the most human fatalities. Pit bull, when a dog kills an animal, whether it's another dog or it's a horse, or it's something in between, a squirrel, whatever. 90 to 95% of the time, it's a pit bull that did the killing. Okay, so that's the pit bull. But I'm talking about really this city pit bull where the genetics have gotten screwed up along the way, and that's what it is that we see. So I have my attitude toward the pit bull is kind of like this. I understand the problem. So, genetically, I get it. But what I'm saying, when you said that the dog can turn unexpectedly, I think that sometimes the dog does give indications that something is changing in the dog. And it's up to the owner to know that. And this is the reason why, to bring in the law, which is, like my main thing, right? This is the reason why 2/3 of the states have adopted what's called a dog bite statute. And the dog bite statute says, as a matter of policy, if you own a dog and it bites somebody, we're not going to ask if the dog ever bit anybody before. We're not going to ask, should you have foreseen it? We're not going to ask any of that. We're simply saying, you pay for it. And that's something that dog owners need to keep in mind, that, when you're getting a dog, get a dog that you can control, and then watch the dog and make sure you know which way that dog is headed. Because in 2/3 of the states, you are considered to be legally liable in a civil sense for anything that happens with that dog under those statutes.
And how much does insurance, like if your dog bit somebody, how much does insurance cover? Does it just depend on insurance? Like how much that would cover that victim's hospital bills, etc.?
Yeah. Okay. So when somebody is injured, our society, going back to hundreds of years, says it's not enough to just toss them some money and say, go get yourself fixed up, because the loss, the damages, what we call damages, the loss, the impact is way beyond that. If it's a dog attack, it can be psychological. It can really screw a person up. In decades of handling dog attack cases, I haven't had very many clients that have gone totally mad because they were attacked by a dog, but I have had a couple, probably 3 to 5 clients who were attacked by a dog, and they could not comprehend. They could not comprehend it. They just couldn't deal with it emotionally. So insurance will cover the full range of what we call the legal damages, which is the pain of the attack, everything that happens during recovery, meaning you get stitched up, you get cleaned out, which is very painful. You have the rabies shots, perhaps. You are going to the doctor. You're inconvenienced. You've lost income if you're an adult. Then you've got a scar. You may have pain where the scar is, and that pain may last forever. There are people that have pain forever, like in the hand or in the arm. They can't do what they used to do before. They can't even do the work they used to do. I represented a female police officer who could not shoot her gun 3 or 4 days per month because she had a recurring condition in her hand because of scar tissue that grew around a nerve in her hand that caused a permanent disability. So she was done as a cop. So the insurance is supposed to cover all that. But here's my message to dog owners, especially renters. Get the insurance. I'm talking about homeowner insurance or renter's insurance, or a third thing called canine liability insurance. These types of insurance will protect you in the event that your dog does something that may not be your fault, but you're legally liable for in one of those, of the 2/3 of the states that will hold you liable for a bite, or many times for any kind of an injury that happens to a person. So you have to have the insurance to cover that, or else otherwise you can get really screwed up. And let me just tell you something about that insurance. When you're getting your insurance, you have to be on the lookout for 2 things that could be in that insurance policy that no one's going to tell you about. One of them is an exclusion for either any accident where an animal's involved, because that'll mean if your dog bites somebody or trips somebody, you won't be covered, or a breed type of exclusion. So it might say German Shepherd, Pit Bull, Malamute, Husky, Doberman, Rottweiler. Those are Wolf Dog all the time. Those are the ones. That's one thing. You gotta read the exclusions. That's one thing. Second thing is, and this is even trickier and nastier. Somewhere in the back of the policy, there'll be a special limit on your insurance. So, for example, you buy a policy and you think it's a $300,000 policy, and you're not aware that there's a clause that establishes a special low limit if an animal is involved. So it turns out to be a $25,000 limit, and now you don't have the money. Your niece or your nephew was injured by the dog. There's all kinds of medical bills that haven't been paid for. The kid has a scar which will be permanent. The kid has pain, and you can't pay for it because you did not have the insurance. It's real bad. And I find that the people that goof this up the most are the renters, because generally only 1 in 5 renters has renter's insurance, which is crazy because renter's insurance protects you from all kinds of things that can happen to your stuff. Or, if you hurt somebody in some other way, it doesn't involve your dog or your car, you'll be covered for that. So it's crazy not to have it. But the renters need to know, if you have a dog, get renter's insurance. And anybody who has homeowner's insurance or renter's insurance, check to see if there's an exclusion or a special limitation. Because otherwise, you may find yourself in a situation where your family won't talk to you anymore because your niece or your nephew was bit by your dog.
And you can't help pay.
Can't pay. Too expensive.
Is there a particular, you said a canine specialty insurance, is there a particular company or brand that you recommend people?
No, but it's called canine liability insurance. And one of the ways to find it is go to my website, which is called dogbitelaw.com. Dogbite, B-I-T-E, law.com. Go there, and in the search box, type insurance for dog owner. And you'll see, among other things, because my website's 1,000 pages of information, and like half of it is for dog owners and for canine pros. You'll see in that section for insurance for dog owners that I have a list of companies that will write these policies. And believe it or not, these policies are incredibly cheap to buy. We're talking about hundreds, even if the dog has already bitten somebody. I mean, they will insure just about any dog. You just got to get the insurance. This comes in really handy, incidentally. If your dog's already bitten somebody and you've been to dog court and they say you got to get insurance, you may have a problem getting insurance that will cover your dog because the insurance company may want to exclude your dog. Well, get the canine liability insurance because that's what it's for.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I know in some states, for an example, I know in California, if somebody breaks into your home, you are legally basically supposed to just hide in a room and let them take everything and then walk away with everything. And you can't really fight back or cause them harm, from my understanding.
I disagree with that. No, I disagree with that. No.
So what I was going to say is, if somebody comes into your home and you shoot them dead, you're liable.
No, there's no firm rule about that. In fact, in California, if somebody breaks into your home and you shoot them dead, there's a legal presumption that you did it because you were afraid for your own life. And starting out with that legal presumption, it's hard to prosecute you. That's the law in California.
Okay, well, that's good. I was told. I was told otherwise. That in California, you're supposed to. Essentially, if somebody breaks into your home, you don't have the right to protect yourself. Like in Texas and other places, like you have a right to bear arms, where if somebody comes into your home, you legally can protect yourself with lethal force. And I know in New York, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, you're actually on the right track. I mean, in most places, you can't use, you have to use force that's commensurate with the force that's being used against you or another person, not against your dog and not against your paintings and your property and your furniture. So, for example, if it was California, and somebody breaks in, yeah, there's a presumption. If you deal with them with lethal force, there's a presumption. But let's forget the home rule. Okay, the rule having to do with your house, your residence. Let's talk about something else. Let's say you're in a business, you're in your store, or you're out on the street. The rule that works all through the country is that you can meet force with force. So if somebody is coming at you with a weapon, well, you're justified in using a weapon. Now, it may be illegal for you to have a gun at that moment. Well, I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is the basic self-defense framework. So you can defend yourself. And this is important for dog owners to know. It's important for everybody to know, because if you cannot defend yourself with any kind of lethal force if the victim is your dog. So you can be watching your dog getting killed to death, mauled to death, killed, and you can't take a gun and start shooting at the other dog. You definitely cannot start fighting with the owner of the other dog who's just standing there watching it happen. You can't do that. It's not allowed for policy reasons.
What the reason why I was bringing that up, thank you for correcting me. The reason why I was bringing that up is because let's say you do have a protective dog and somebody breaks into your home. Is the dog able to, and when I mean break in, I'm not talking about your neighbor who came over for beers. I'm talking like somebody coming in maliciously trying to either rob your home or worse. What do dog owners legally have the right to do, or what does the dog what's the standing there if your dog attacks that person or bites that person, or even worse than that?
Yeah, you're in great shape. You're in great shape.
Okay.
Yeah, the dog can do pretty much what it wants to the person if they are a trespasser. And this comes up a lot for me because there's something known as technical trespass, which is where you see a dog on a lawn and you reach over to pet the dog and the dog bites you on the hand, and you go, "Oh my God, oh, this is great. I'm in a state with statutory liability. I don't have to care about whether the dog ever bit anybody before." But then it turns out that like all the statutes, all the dog bite statutes, they all have an exemption for trespassers, and by crossing the line, the airspace, by getting into the airspace of the person that owned that property, you've committed a technical trespass. So, trespass is an issue in dog attack cases for that reason. But as a practical matter, if you have a dog that is a protective dog, that is not a maniac dog, a Cujo dog, a dog known to be violent toward everybody, then you're in perfect shape. I mean, if somebody comes onto your property, a burglar, even a friend who wasn't invited opens the door and walks in. I've had people come to me like that and say, well, of course I was allowed in. I always went in without giving notice. But then on that occasion, the person wasn't home, and that wasn't the rule, that you could go in when I'm not home. That becomes a trespass, and no, you can't. You're going to get nothing. You're going to get nothing. You're going to have to go to your health insurance or your Medicaid or Medicare and have them pay your bills.
Yeah, and does that ever get? I mean, I'm sure it gets tricky where kids are involved, right? Where where and I want to talk to you about this because this is a real issue for people. Like, this is a real thing for people, and I don't think many people are, if any, are talking about it. You're hanging out at your house as parents, and your 10-year-old runs in with their friends, and then your dog bites the friend. I mean, could you technically say, we didn't invite him over, or her, or whatever?
No.
I mean, how does that work?
No, because there's something in the law called an implied invitation. I've
Okay,
had
that makes
this.
sense.
I've had this come up a jillion times. I've
Okay.
handled almost. I've been the lead
A
attorney
jillion
on
cases.
almost 1,000 successful cases in the time I've been doing this. So I've had this happen a lot where a kid is involved, and let's say the custom in that neighborhood is that the kids run all over the neighborhood and they go into each other's backyards. And that's just the custom in the neighborhood. Now, the dog owner whose dog bit one of these children in their own backyard comes along and says, "Now, wait a minute. I didn't know that the kids were in the backyard that day. In fact, they were painting in the house that day, and I didn't want any kids in the house that day. I never gave permission for any kids to be there, so I should
Right.
not be held responsible." Well, there's a thing called an implied invitation, which is you've allowed it to happen. You've allowed it on 10 other occasions or on 2 other occasions. You never said no on those occasions. It's always been okay with you. So, sorry, that's an implied invitation.
No, that
And
makes
then
sense.
yeah. And then there were people also whose job requires them to go onto other people's property, like the utility workers,
Pool
the
guys or
the pool
whatever.
guy. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So those
Yeah.
people have a legal right to be there. So there's no saying they're a trespasser.
What's the legality on, like, if you have a dog that could potentially be dangerous? Like, I know when I used to be a dog walker, when I would have clients who had police dogs, which I had a couple over the years, but not many, and they put a sign out on the door that says canine, beware of dog or whatever. Like, do those signs actually hold weight in a court case where if you put a sign on your door that says beware of dog, and let's say the Amazon guy comes up and drops a package off and then the dog, bites him or whatever, or you have a trained police dog or a trained personal protection dog, and somebody unlawfully comes on your property that you didn't know about, whether it was a friend or foe, do those signs actually hold any weight and accountability in a court?
Yeah, they do. They are a great thing to have. For example, in Florida, the dog bite statute specifically says that you can't recover compensation for a dog attack if the person had a bad dog sign. So the bad dog sign in Florida is really important to have.
Wow.
Everywhere else, I would say that the general rule would be that it's a great thing to have, because you are basically shifting the responsibility onto the other person. You're saying to people that you're assuming the risk of a dog attack because there's a dog in here and he's a dog that might bite. So it's a really good thing. Now,
Wow.
has it ever backfired on anybody? Yeah. It has backfired on people who had a dog that had a history of biting, because it's one more item of evidence that they knew that the dog had a history of biting. But then again, there's a lot of ways to prove that a person knows about their dog's history. And if you do know about your dog's history, the smartest thing to do would be to warn everybody to keep away from the dog. So I say warn them and forget about the legalities of it. And if you're in Florida, definitely put the sign up. And incidentally, there was a time when I didn't have a dog, and I did have the beware of dogs sign up because, it's a great thing to keep burglars away. So,
Yeah, I would assume majority of burglars are non-violent burglars that are trying to just get goods and money, valuables. And when they go knocking or breaking or lurking or searching and they hear a dog or see a dog, I'm sure that has to be a considerable deterrent for most of these people who are like, yeah, that's not worth it. I don't want to fight any dog, Chihuahua or whatever, I would assume.
yes, but in your business and in my business, in advising people, we should never advise them to get a dog for that purpose, because that's not enough of a reason to have a dog. But if you're a good dog owner and you love dogs, fine, get the dog. If the dog is sufficiently aggressive, against trespassers, yeah, that's a good thing. But watch it, because if the dog is is biting people that come into your yard, and then you take the dog for a walk, and the dog starts biting other people on the walk, now that's going to be a bit of a problem for you. And the sign that said, "Watch out for my dog might bite," that could be considered as one other item of evidence that you knew that your dog could bite people.
What if you did, like, does the beware of dog, couldn't that also be a sign of not, like, I've also had clients, because I remember I've had clients who've had the beware of dog on the thing, on the fence, and I'm like, why do you have, like, your dog is like the nicest dog in the world. They say, oh, well, we just don't want people to let our dog out. So oftentimes when landscapers or whatever, they'll come over and they'll open that gate, and they don't want, they're letting people know that there's a dog in here, and they don't want the dog to run out. Has that ever come up? Like, is that a thing?
Absolutely,
Or
absolutely.
backfires,
I had a case where, and it's funny because before you asked me about what the damages are, and I said there were a few people that I've represented where the dog attack literally drove them nuts. So I had a case like that. And there were construction workers doing work on the property next door to the woman's house, and they let the dog out. Either they weren't following the rules, or they I don't know, they were just being negligent, and they let the Rottweilers get out, and then there was an attack, and it happened more than once. It happened twice. So that woman actually had a huge mental problem that occurred because of being attacked, basically on the doorway, in the doorway of her own home twice. So yeah, I mean that's a thing, and the sign can be very helpful under those circumstances. I mean, if you've got workers at your house, you better take care of your dog. You better confine your dog properly. And if your dog has to be out, you better make sure that those workers know that they're supposed to keep the dog confined. And the sign is a good thing because the sign will help keep people away. And so I'm all for it. I'm all for the signs. I think that the bad dog signs are very important. In Florida, they're totally essential. But everywhere else, they're very important.
And what about if you're hanging, like, what about if you go to the grocery store, you go to the mall and you park your vehicle and your dog's in your vehicle, and somebody comes up and sees your dog who doesn't like people, and that person tries to pet the dog through your own window and they bite that person? Where does that lead to? Whose fault is that?
First of all, is your dog known to bite people? Okay, so let's say the answer is no. He's not known to bite people. Secondly, what's your dog doing in your car while you're somewhere else? Because that will be looked at as being possibly a bad thing that you were doing. If I had a case like that and all I had to go on was that the dog was in the car, let's say he's got some water, he's got some food and water in the car, so there's no issue about cruelty, all right? So we've got food and water in the car, and the window's down enough that he's got air to breathe, and it's not a hot day, although here in Beverly Hills it might very well be a hot day. Assuming all these conditions were not anything that you can be held responsible for, the fact that somebody reached in, that would be a tough one, because I guess I wouldn't take that case, because I would say, well, the dog owner actually didn't do anything wrong, just left the dog in the car. The dog it wasn't inhumane. It wasn't anything that would incite the dog and make the dog violent. And this person reached in, and that's their property, and that's a trespass. And so I'm not taking that case. But, you might know that your dog does not like to be locked up in the car. You may know that your dog has separation anxiety. I just had a case like that where the guy ties up the dog to a pole with a leash that is a retractable leash. Okay. So, and then the guy sits at an outdoor cafe so the dog can see him. And what does the dog do? He walks over and sits by the owner. And there's now this line stretching across the sidewalk, and an old lady walks by, doesn't see the line, and she falls and she's injured. I mean, so, it depends. It depends. If I can show that you did something that you should have known would cause your dog, which is locked up in your car, to bite a person, even if the person was nice, and even if the person reached in. Let me tell you a little something about these cases. Most states, it's not an either or if there's a dog bite. It could be that it's partially the dog owner's fault and partially the fault of the person who was bitten. And in that case, we do a thing where we do an apportionment. So if we say that the dog was locked up and the dog owner should have known that this dog has separation anxiety, he gets all hyper when he's not around the owner, and the victim reached the hand in, or the dog's head was halfway out. The dog's head was halfway out, and the person's petting the dog, and the dog snaps. That could be a 50-50, meaning that if there's, let's say, the average in the high-priced states is like about $70,000 when a person is bit by a dog and there's a claim. Remember, there aren't that many claims. But when there's a claim, it's like around $70,000 in the high-priced states. Okay, so it's going to result in a $35,000. If it's a 50-50, $35,000 to the person who was bitten, which hopefully will cover their, all their damages, their medical bills and their pain and suffering and all that. But suppose you don't have the insurance, and now you have a judgment against you for $35,000. Bad thing. So you need to, I guess, when you're thinking about what the risks are of having a dog and whether you should have insurance or not, you got to think of all these things, including the comparative negligence rule. Incidentally, that rule doesn't work the same way in every state. So, it's different from state to state. It's different. But like a state like California has what they call the pure comparative negligence. So so if the dog owner is 10% responsible, they got to pay for 10%. If they're 90% responsible, they pay for 90%. It's the whole gamut like that.
No, that makes sense. What's the laws and rules and regulations off a running at large dog who is attacking or aggressively going after somebody? What does a human being legally, what are we able to do? Let's say you're out for a walk with your kids and there's a aggressive dog coming. Like, are you able to euthanize that dog, hit that dog, kick that dog, spray that dog? Because I know that's a conversation when I seminar different parts of the world. I mean, Netherlands to Portugal to Australia, all the laws are so wildly different. But like in the United States, what is acceptable if you have a running at large aggressive dog that's a threat to you and your family?
It's the self-defense rule that I was talking about earlier.
Okay.
Whenever you or another person is confronted with a person or an animal, a domestic, we'll talk about domestic animals as opposed to wild animals. We're not talking about mountain lions or snakes or anything like that. We're talking about domestic animal or a person that is threatening to cause a bodily injury to a person, yourself or somebody, could be a stranger. You're allowed to use whatever force is reasonable under the circumstances. That's not an illegal means. So in other words, if you're not allowed to have a gun concealed on your person in that area, and you pull the gun for a very good reason, because that dog is about to kill somebody, or that dog is in the process of killing somebody, they're going to pin a medal on you for saving that kid or saving that person, and then they're going to prosecute you for possession of the weapon that you shouldn't have had, carrying a concealed weapon, discharge of a firearm within city limits, those may be the charges against you. Oh, they may also add cruelty to an animal because you shouldn't have had the gun to begin with. So that it's a mixed bag. But you're allowed to use whatever means is reasonable under the circumstances to protect a person or yourself. The exception to that is when a dog is worrying a farm animal. Worrying means The dog is approaching, surrounding. The dog is trespassing, and it's a farm animal, like it's sheep, it's chickens. Just about everywhere. It could be everywhere. I haven't looked at these laws because they don't really apply to human beings. But everywhere I've ever looked, that you can kill that dog. I mean, if you've got a sniper rifle, you can kill that dog. So the farm animals have a degree of protection in the law that people don't even have.
Yeah.
Interesting, right? But these are all old laws. These are all old laws. So it's not a statute that's going to say that you can protect yourself. It's the common law, which has this common sense rule in it, which is you can do whatever is reasonable under the circumstances, but it has to be to protect a person, not your dog.
Yeah, because I live in upstate New York, so I actually have a farm right behind me. It's not a livestock farm; it's just like crops and stuff. But if it was a livestock farm and my dog, I mean, I share a property line with them. Like their tractor is right there, and so if my dog were to go over there and they had cattle or sheep or whatever, they would have means to shoot my dog, even though my dog was just running around being an idiot, and that's kind of crazy. I've heard those stories before. I had a veterinarian on there was a ER vet, and she had that happen where a dog just got out of the yard and was just running around, and the guy shot the dog. It survived, but it was just a sad thing because the dog was like the friendliest dog in the world, and he got out and the owners didn't know, and he just was like running around after the livestock, and the farmer shot him. And it's just sad, but I know that's probably, it's kind of like the laws out west in Montana and Wyoming that they're fighting with the wolves, right? With the cattle and all that.
Sure,
It's like
sure.
it's tough. It's like you got to play devil's advocate, and it's tough. But it's hard but I would argue that when a wolf is circling cattle or baby cows, the intentions are pretty dang clear about what's going to happen. Where if you have just an off-leash dog that slipped out and now is just running around the farm because they're excited, and they just so happen to be literally ruffling some chicken feathers or some ducks, and the chickens are like running around, but the dog's just having a time of their life, and they get shot in the head for it. It's like, it's really sad because you can see where maybe the farmer, I mean, I couldn't personally, being a dog lover, like why, the dog wasn't doing anything, but I could see that. But then also it's not the dog's fault because the owners didn't know the dog was out, and it was their fault because they didn't lock the gate or whatever. But that's a really unfortunate thing, I think. That there's like no, leniency there of like, I would say to make it, because it's like, you'd have to say if the dog was, I mean, to make it more fair, I would say the dog would have to actually be connected with the animal and causing harm versus like a dog who just walks across the street and looks at a chicken, bang, and it's like, that's tough.
These laws have their origin in another period of time when the economic consequences to the family that owned the goat or the chicken or whatever, the geese, whatever it is, where those people really needed that to survive and relied on it. They sold the eggs, whatever, or they drink the milk, and it was a different time when these things were dealt with differently. I mean, the animal cruelty laws didn't even pop up until basically the late 1800s. I mean, the very first animal control department was the SPCA in New York, and that didn't get founded until sometime around the turn of the century, the late 1800s or the early 1900s. So animal cruelty was not really a thing. I mean, people dealt with animals as animals. There was not much concern for them. We're a lot different now. The morality is different. The way we look at things is different. And so a lot of these old rules don't strike us as being fair. But I would say, based on the times that I have become involved when a farm animal was being threatened, based on that, I fully understood what happened. But I will also say that the people that were involved in those incidents were not necessarily friends of each other. They were either complete strangers, or they had an anger toward each other to begin with. They're not getting along anyway. So, mixed bag. Fortunately, I don't hear too much about that happening.
Yeah, it's not really up your avenue anyway. So the old statistics about golden retrievers being the number one dog with the most bites in the U.S. Is that still true?
No, not at all.
Okay,
No,
because there
it's
was
not the number one dog with the most bites. No, the number one dog with the most bites is probably the Chihuahua.
Yeah.
That dog. It's funny. The two dogs that are given back the most often are the Chihuahuas and the Pit Bulls, and because they're both very aggressive dogs, and the Chihuahua bites all the time. It's just that it doesn't really necessarily hurt anybody when it bites.
Yeah. And do you think, and maybe you don't know the answer to this, but do you think that's just because people treat Chihuahuas and smaller dogs like a Tamagotchi or a Chia Pet versus an actual dog, and their confidence is absolutely ruined because they're carrying them around in purses all day? Or do you think that the actual breed themselves are genuinely, like, if you didn't treat the dog like a little baby, do you feel like the Chihuahua would still bite as many people?
The Chihuahua is a very, very aggressive dog. These little dogs, many of them were bred as a kind of a guard dog. In other words, they were bred to feel a certain sense of hostility toward anything unusual going on around them, and then to alert people. And they were bred for an aggression. I have a feeling that Chihuahuas they're among the bad dogs of the world. They just don't cause a lot of harm. I'm appalled by the way people treat them, putting them in the purse and carrying them to dinner and not training them and not putting boundaries around them. Yeah, I'm appalled by that. And I'm sure that is part of the problem. But I kind of feel that they are just based on how often they are given up to the pound. I kind of feel that they have a streak that makes them a little too aggressive.
Yeah, I gotta search for that because I'm trying to think. I've done so much breed stuff. I gotta see like the Chihuahua. What they were bred for, because it's like they're so small. They're not terriers. So Chihuahuas were bred for. So this is ChatGPT. So these are my these are my what would we call in court? This is my testimony to Chihuahuas here. So
Okay, yeah.
so Chihuahua wasn't bred for herding, guarding, or hunting like a lot of working dogs. So it says Chihuahuas were actually bred for companionship first, and they were bred to be close, loyal companions to living homes and temples of nobility, spiritual and symbolic symbols, warmth providers. They are extremely attached to their person. Their alert and reactivity is part of their survival instinct, and they often act bigger than they are. So I think that combination of being attached to their, and again, ChatGPT, take it with a grain of salt, because there's a lot of context that, unless we're talking about statistical facts, ChatGPT is not so great at reading between the lines sometimes. But their extreme attachment to people and their alertness and to be reactive, and they often act bigger than they are. So that's kind of like a recipe for these types of things. Now, service dog training it sounds like you got another garbage truck pulling up. So if anybody's hearing this, it's just the nice trash collectors of Beverly Hills, baby, 90210.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I want to talk about service dog training. So as a trainer, as a dog owner, as a world traveler myself, the animal, I think it was a Sebastian Maniscalco did a bit on this where he's like, are you familiar with Sebastian?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he did a bit where he's like, the peacocks were running. They had peacocks on the flight. It was crazy, but it is a thing now. So where does this, like, if let's say a dog was trained to be a service dog, have you run into a lot of loopholes and legality, kind of mental gymnastics that you've had to work around with service dogs being fake and not real? Or I'm sure you've had to run into stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've run into it a number of times. In the first place, let me note that pretending that a dog is a service dog or pretending that a dog is being trained as a service dog, those are crimes in most places. Those are crimes. So that's the good news. There's more good news, which is that when we're talking about things like geese and pigs and small ponies, it was the case that people were bringing these things on planes, including the small pony, saying that they needed it for emotional support. So now there's more of a distinction than there was in the past between the emotional support dog, which to me is utter nonsense, than the service animal. So now focusing on service animals, there's a whole range of them, because you might break them down into two categories. One category, there's no training at all. There's no training at all. There are dogs that are sometimes referred to as seizure dogs, and I've come across these dogs. A seizure dog is a dog that just knows that a person, that their owner, is going to have a seizure, and they were not trained for that. They just started exemplifying, that behavior. But then you have the trained service dog, which is like the guide dog, the dogs for the blind, the dogs that are the hearing dogs, and I'm all for that. I'm all for handicapped people having their rights. I think that's great. But if you bring a dog that is obviously not capable of listening to directions, if it's for example, a person will have a dog and they'll say it's a service dog, and they'll walk into a restaurant and that dog will immediately go after somebody's food. That's not a service dog. It's just not, because they know they're not supposed to do that. So
yeah, and a lot of service dog training is predicated off of genetics. So a lot of service, like true service dogs, are just like the most docile, chill. They don't care about anything, and the training is kind of the icing on the cake. But the core of the behavior, personality, and temperament of service dogs, generally speaking, are a genetic disposition. Like these dogs are born cool, calm, and collective, and confident, and then they just turn into like the most. You sit down at dinner and they take a nap. And as a trainer, of course, I've been it's been a discussion for many years now about service dogs. And when I travel, it's the worst when I see dogs that are pulling at the end of the leash or barking and reacting, or the worst is when a fake service dog is barking at a real service dog. And obviously the real service dog is not phased. However, it's stressful for the handler of the real service dog because they have to go through all that unnecessary stress of the fake dog who just wanted to go to Applebee's with their dog because they didn't want to leave him home because they're codependent. And so it's a mess. And, and I've had clients that have had like the chillest dogs ever. They don't have any tasks, and they've told me, "Oh well, I put a vest on." When I'm like, okay, it's a risk. It's nothing's probably going to happen, but there's still a risk of
Sure.
like something happening. It's anyway. So one thing I wanted
Well,
to
let me say something about
please.
the risk. Whenever we evaluate in my business, whenever we evaluate whether or not we should pursue something against somebody, one of the things that we're evaluating is how is this person going to come off to a jury or a judge, but mostly to a jury. So, for example, if a person does something heroic and somebody, let's say, is killed by a dog, and the owner did something heroic, the owner's not going to get prosecuted. Let's say the person who is the dog owner is the parent of the kid who was mauled. Nothing's going to happen to them. And I would say, unfortunately, in some cases, because there have been some horrible parents that have left their kids under horrible circumstances with dogs, and the kids have gotten killed. But what we're looking for is somebody. If we're thinking that we have to find a remedy against the person, because to do justice, we have to find a remedy. If the person comes off as a lawbreaker, as a terrible person in society because of something about them, including they were pretending that they had a service dog and they were getting all the advantages of having a service dog. The dog was led into the restaurant, et cetera, et cetera. If I know that's a factor in the case, I'm going after that person. That may be the thing that made me, that pushed me to actually take action against that person. So it's not a good thing. You may not be criminally prosecuted, even though the law says that it is a criminal offense if you are pretending that a dog is a service dog and it's not in training to be a service dog. Okay, fine. They may not prosecute you, but if something happens, you're going to be hung out to dry, most likely.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I mean, I think just somebody being unapologetic about something that's their fault is also just not a good look, and probably isn't going to be good in court. Probably isn't going to be good in a jury or a judge where they're coming in and they're like, well, they shouldn't have reached for my dog or whatever, versus somebody that's like, you know what, this is totally my fault. I'm so sorry. What can I do? These are the precautions I'm taking, etc. I mean, that makes sense.
Well, what I say to people, to dog owners who come to me and say, "What can I do? My dog bit somebody. I don't know what to do." I wrote a book called "Defending Your Dog: Win Your Case in Dog Court." It's one of the books that I've written, and it's about the situation of how do you handle a where your dog has done something to somebody. One of the first things is you be nice to the victim. You be real nice to the victim. I'm not saying accept responsibility. I'm not saying that. Maybe you should, but I'm not saying to do it. But you really need to be real nice if your dog causes a problem, or if you cause a problem for somebody. Because I have learned, representing dog attack victims, most of them will say to me, I didn't want to do anything. I mean, even if they've got like a really bad injury and they've got a lot of medical bills, most of them will say, I really didn't want to do anything, but that person, they wouldn't talk to me afterwards. They said this, they said that, they sent me this horrible text message. They wouldn't,
Oh, wow.
when I went down there to tell them what happened to my son, they wouldn't open the door for me.
Wow.
And so,
Yeah.
that enrages people, and
Sure.
that's bad. Don't enrage the victim.
Yeah. I think it's just society, right? There's good people, there's bad people. And sometimes there's people, and it sucks because I see it all the time with just in general, human beings just aren't taught how to be mature or how to man up, if you will, where it's like, take responsibility, take accountability. Oh my God, are you okay? What can I do? Here's what I'm doing, call for help, do this, get call an ambulance, whatever. But I think there's so many people who just aren't taught. Like, I think it just comes down to parenting, unfortunately. And I don't know, that's just kind of in my own head just because I have kids and I'm so conscious of going out of my way to overly explain the reason why we do this is because of this, right? Even if somebody is mean and even if somebody is rude, we do this and this is how we are. And my 3-year-old would be like, why? And I would just constantly over explain just to be the bigger person and just do the right thing. And that's what I'm just passionate about with my little ones.
Let me jump in with a legal angle on that.
Okay, please.
The law respects Good Samaritans.
Really?
So there will be people that will say, my dog bit somebody, but I better not talk to them. I better not give them any money. I better not say anything. And I've seen this break up families because, 75% of the time when there's a dog bite, it's not a stranger's dog came along and bit the victim. It's either a friend's dog, a family member's dog, or a neighbor's dog. So in these circumstances, there's no legal problem being nice. There's no legal problem. Now, I said before, don't start talking about legal responsibility. First of all, it'll probably get you into an argument because you might really believe that you didn't do anything wrong. Don't get into that with the victim. What you need to do with the victim is be sympathetic and helpful. Stay there. Call 911. If the person doesn't have insurance and can't and needs something, go ahead and give them a little bit of money to pay the medical bill. Do that. Go ahead, do that. I mean, if it's a lot of money, you got to go to my website, dogbitelaw.com, and you got to, in my store, I sell basically it's a release. It's a release. So if you're going to give the person a bunch of money, you better get a release for that because, you don't want it. It would be unfair if they take a bunch of money from you and then come after you for more, like blackmailing you almost by it. But what I'm saying is be nice, because if you're nice, you will, first of all, you'll help the situation. Number 2, it's the moral thing to do, the ethical thing to do. Number 3, it will curtail their desire to pursue you formally. They may not even report the thing, the incident to the animal control department because you were being so nice, and now they're afraid that it's going to come back and hurt you in some way. I've had so many people take that attitude, and which I hate, but because it should be reported. But there are so many reasons to be nice to the victim when you're the dog owner.
I think it's. I say yeah, like it's no big deal, but I think it is hard. So many people are so embarrassed, mortified, traumatized that they just run away, or they're like, I've seen that happen with my clients, where their dog does something really bad and they're so embarrassed that they either act like it never happened or they just run away and they never talk about it again because they're just not mature enough to be like, I am so sorry, and take accountability. And it is hard. Like, I think in that moment it's uncomfortable, but it's the right thing to do. And that's why it's just important. So I want to, the whole process of a dangerous dog, right? So can you kind of get back to the core of my first conversation and this whole podcast kind of ethos is, if your dog bites somebody, it doesn't mean that the dog catcher is going to come and remove your dog and you're not going to see him again. They're just going to put him down. It doesn't happen like that. What is the process? I know in New York State, the dangerous dog essentially is if a dog bite happens and the victim is seeking some sort of action, right? So if they want the dog to be put down, or if they're trying to sue you or whatever, and they're trying to prove that the dog is dangerous, and they have like this, to your point of just being a good person when it happens, now they have this vendetta against the dog, and maybe they should, maybe the dog is dangerous and should be addressed. But I know in New York State, you have to go to court, and then even in the courts, they usually use a professional, whether it's a behaviorist or a trainer or somebody, and they come in and they kind of address the situation. What is, I'll just kind of let you, this is your thing. What is the process in that typically across the country?
Okay. First of all, let me tell you, New York changed its laws. New York changed its laws about 6 months to a year ago. There was a court decision from about 15 years ago, which was a pathetic court decision where a carpenter was hired to do some repairs in a barn. And he came to do the repairs, and he went in the barn. What they didn't tell him when he went in the barn was that this was a barn that where the bulls would be in the barn. And they didn't tell him that they're not keeping the bulls out of the barn, so watch out for the bull. So what happened is the bull comes into the barn, sees the guy working in the barn, and just goes after him and seriously injured him. And New York said, "Oh, there's no liability there because the bull had never bitten anybody before and or injured anybody before, and they had never been through a court proceeding before." New York changed all that about, I'd say, 6 months to a year ago. So watch out. The law in New York is now more like other states, where if an accident is foreseeable, or you do something stupid, you're going to be held legally liable and civilly and administratively liable for that. Okay, so getting to your question, the procedure involving the so-called dangerous dog is based always on local laws. In other words, specific laws. Now, these could be city laws, county laws, or in some cases, state laws. But those laws will set forth an identification of what's bad, what makes a dog a dangerous dog in that jurisdiction. It's different from place to place. Now, certainly,
Right.
if a dog bites somebody, certainly you've met the standard. But there are a lot of other little tricks, let's call them, or catch-22s. Like, for example, in one place, and don't ask me exactly where because it's been a while since I read it. If you are caught walking more than, it was either 3 dogs or 4 dogs, the dogs would be considered dangerous dogs. And you go, well, why is that? They didn't do anything to anybody. Well, that's a behavior that jurisdiction wants to cover, wants to prohibit, and wants to provide a remedy for. Okay? So it's a dangerous dog. So you have to look at the dangerous dog law in your area to know exactly what is the dangerous dog in this area. Okay, so once we get past that, then the question is, what happens next? All right, you should have a citation. There should be a citation that tells you exactly what it was that you did wrong. What law are you accused of violating? The citation then becomes the roadmap of the prosecution. In my book, which is called Defending Your Dog, Win Your Case in Dog Court, the first chapter or 2 is all about that citation. How do you read that? Because you got to read it carefully, because you got to know exactly what it is they're accusing you of, and because sometimes it's something very technical. All right, the next thing that happens after you get the citation is that you should be invited or summoned, or meaning compelled, to a hearing. That should be the next thing that happens. That doesn't happen everywhere. In many,
And is that hearing predicated off of the victim? Because I would assume it's not
No.
every single dog bite you go to court, or how does?
Right. You're right about that. It has nothing. The victim is only a witness in these proceedings. So let me be specific. I'm talking about the dangerous dog hearing, sometimes called dog court. That's what I'm talking about. So that could be an administrative proceeding presided over by an animal control officer. It could be presided over by a law student, or it could be a court hearing presided over by a real judge. But that's what we're talking about. And that's not automatic. You have to be cited in. You have to get a summons, a citation, saying that you got to be there. Or sometimes it happens a little differently, where the animal control department has the right to simply issue an order saying your dog is a dangerous dog, but if you want a hearing on this, you need to ask for one within a certain period of time. So again, you need to see that citation, and you need to know what the law is in your area because it's different everywhere. So the next thing that would happen if you are contesting the dangerous dog designation or you've been cited into court, is you show up with evidence and you present your case. Now, do some people show up with a lawyer? Yes, because I've done those and I've defended dog owners in those hearings. And sometimes I've been welcome, and sometimes I've been told I better shut up or they're going to throw me out. I mean, because it's not, these hearings are not hearings where it's expected for lawyers to show up, but lawyers occasionally do show up. So that's the next. So that's the thing that happens at that point. They issue a decision, they issue a ruling, and that ruling might be that the dog is potentially dangerous, which is not a dangerous dog. A potentially dangerous dog is something that is at a lower level of badness. Or they may say the dog is a vicious dog or a dangerous dog, and that usually is pretty serious. It does not mean they're going to put the dog down. Sometimes they can put the dog down, but the law in your jurisdiction might specifically say that all they can do is X, Y, and Z, and putting the dog down may not be one of those things, no matter what the dog does. So you got to be aware of that.
Yep.
Because you may have rights, and you may have the need to get a lawyer to make sure that you get the right penalty and not the wrong penalty. So after that, the next step, if you don't like, what has happened, the next step would be you appeal it. But along the way, has your dog been taken away and put down? No, it would come at the end of that process, and you would be notified of your right to an appeal.
Yeah, and most times from when I've went to court, I remember I went to this one court out in the country. It was like a small little courthouse, and the judge was just mediating between the family and the victim. And they were basically saying, and I was called there because they hired me as a trainer after the fact. And I remember the judge basically kind of agreeing with everybody, saying, okay, they agreed that the dog is going to stay with the in-laws in another town, which I was like, the judge was basically like, not my circus, not my monkeys. The dog is not going to come back into my county or my town or whatever.
I'm so against that. It was
really interesting. It was really interesting because they were basically not willing to get answers. They weren't willing to go, is the dog dangerous? What should happen? And so instead of saying, well, the dog needs to be muzzled in public or the dog needs further evaluation by a professional or whatever, they just said the owners are, because they were just terrified of the dog being put down, and I understand that. And they said, well, we're just going to leave our dogs with our in-laws in the other town. And he said, yep. Is that okay with everybody? The dog's not going to live in our community anymore? And they were like, yep. And I was just really kind of, I don't know. I was confused by that, but also taken back.
Okay. All right. To me, that should be illegal, because what the judge is doing is taking a time bomb and just planting it somewhere else. Yeah. That's it.
Have you seen that before?
That should be illegal. Yes, absolutely yes. All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And what makes it really bad is that there is no national registry of dangerous dogs. So that if a dog is found to be so dangerous in a community that they want it out of that community and put into the adjoining town or adjoining county, there's no record of that except in the local animal control department, and they don't share that with anybody. It's really bad. There should be a federal law that says you can't do it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Like just moving the dog to another place. I remember when I was many years ago, I was in Nebraska, and I had a client come to a seminar that I was doing, and it was like really strict laws, and this is again what they said, but they said that because the dog had a bite history, the dog had to be muzzled for, I think, 2 years in public, no matter what, and then Are you familiar with that law where they had to muzzle the dog in public after that one incident, and then there was like a 2-year evaluation or a 3-year evaluation or something pretty hefty?
Yeah. That happens. Where they say the dog has to be muzzled in public. you've got to abide by the following rules of confinement for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
You've got to keep all kinds of different things. You've got to have the insurance. Yeah, that does happen. And maybe in the case that you're talking about, it was not warranted, but I've seen cases where I felt that it wasn't even enough. So it would be a matter of the particular circumstances and what's appropriate. It shouldn't
Yeah.
be. It shouldn't be it shouldn't be a terrible sentence. That's not appropriate. I mean, I've gotten involved in cases like that where the dog owner was saying, I fully am responsible for this. I will pay for whatever it is that has to be paid for, and I will do the following things with the dog, but my dog should not be put down as a result, or these conditions are too onerous. I'm going to be on probation, for the next 5 years? Doesn't make any sense. In some places, you can be banned from even having a dog for a period of time. If the incident is a bad enough incident, they may say, you can't have a dog for the next year or the next 2 years. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
In places, I know, like in Denver, for an example, there's breed laws. Like they can't have pit bulls and some other breeds. In cities and in jurisdictions where the breed laws are set, what is defining that? Do they do a DNA test, or they just look at the dog and say, yeah, this is because everything is a lab mix or a pit bull mix or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Do you know how that works?
Right. Well, there's so much. There's been so much litigation over this. The attitude of the courts has been that you don't need generic DNA tests or anything like that. The courts have said that that an ordinary person can recognize a dog that has pit bull in it, and the way the laws are now being written, they're being written. Some of them would just come right out and say, if it looks like a pit bull, it's a pit bull. Other laws are more limiting, and of course we have to not only talk about the laws as they're written, but we have to talk about all the regulations that are breed-specific regulations. Like, for example, housing regulations, leases, rules for malls. And rules about what kind of dogs you can bring on an airplane, all these things. So the question that you're asking has to do with, well, how much proof do we need that a dog is one of the breeds that has been selected for special treatment in a certain situation? And man, it just spans from, does it look like a pit bull? Then fine, then it's a pit bull. All the way to, man, you got to prove it. You got to prove that dog is mostly pit bull. So there's no one rule.
Yeah, because there's a lot of breeds that may look like staffies and other breeds that, look to the naked eye, look like a pit bull. And I know it's just a gray area. What's the craziest case you've been involved in?
Geez, I've been involved in so many crazy cases. I'm involved in a case right now that exemplifies, that shows a practice that has started among rescues and even public shelters. I call it dog laundering. Okay, think of money laundering. What is money laundering? Money laundering is the money comes in, and it's bad money. It's from a bank robbery, and you run it through something that disguises the origin of that money. Like you've got a liquor store, and you just all of a sudden you're declaring on your income tax that the liquor store is making hundreds of thousands more than it usually does, but it legitimizes that particular money. What has been going on in the last few years has been a scheme where a vicious dog is impounded. So it's either impounded by a public shelter, the dog pound, or it goes to a rescue a rescue group, meaning a private organization, maybe a nonprofit, usually a nonprofit. And what they do is they pass it off to another similar group, a rescue group. They don't adopt it out themselves because they know that it's easy to show that they knew all about this dog being a bad dog. So what they do, they give it to the second rescue. The name is changed. No vet records are given, and nothing is mentioned about the history. And then that rescue group adopts out the dog. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. And I've gotten a number of cases where it doesn't. I'm involved in a case like that right now, where it is very, very clear what went on, and they're fighting it, saying, "Oh, we didn't know, but they knew." So I would say that of the crazy situations that I've seen, that to me is worth mentioning. Let's put it that way, worth mentioning. I had a death case several years ago where a homeless woman who had a nice life, had kids, but was just down on her luck, was looking for work. She went to a place where she knew that there had been an eviction, and she went there looking for work. And the guy who had been evicted had actually hidden himself in a shed in the backyard. So when the sheriff came to evict him, the sheriff didn't see him. And when the new owners of the property came to inspect the property, they didn't see him. And they didn't see that the gate on the property was not sufficient to hold hold itself shut, whether it could be pushed open or whether it would blow open or whether anybody would come from the outside and open it. So what happens is this poor woman goes there, talks to one of the tenants who did belong there, this guy's pit bull, this guy who didn't belong there, his dog comes out from the shed, gets through that gate that was broken, and kills this woman in front of everybody, incidentally. Because when a dog is killing somebody, it's not like everybody in the neighborhood jumps in. No, they don't. There were 15 people standing around watching, yelling at the dog, throwing things. But no, it took a while to kill that woman. So that was a very crazy case that I had, because I was asked to help the children of this woman. And I was very concerned that I would lose a case like that. I ended up winning it because I was able to show that the people that bought the property, they should have inspected it better. They should have inspected. They should have seen the guy in the back in the shed. They should have inspected the gate and fixed it. So on the basis of that, I ended up winning that case. But I would say that was that was just an amazing case. But I've done some other things that have been really, kind of extraordinary. Like I've been asked to write laws. I was asked to write a pit bull ban by a state senator, and I said no. I said, well, let's not go that route. Let's write some laws that have to do with actually fixing a number of other problems that you have in your state, such as animal cruelty, cockfighting, and things of that nature. And so I got the opportunity to write laws for that state, and the laws were enacted. And I've written dangerous dog laws with all the procedures in them. That's why I'm so familiar with it. So I've done some pretty cool stuff in my career. I mean, I have handled as the winning lawyer, just under 1,000 dog attack cases, including cases involving the death of a family member. And so I've had a good career, and I've had some crazy stuff that I've seen. Most of the time, I see a lot of ignorance on the part of the dog owner, and that's what causes the problem.
Yeah, it's got to be a tough job to deal with all that all the time, but I'm sure
Yeah.
it's something. It's also good to help people.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
listen, Ken, I appreciate you coming on. This has been really incredible. When I was searching for a podcast guest that I haven't done before, or an outlier of kind of a topic, and I came up with this, and I looked up like who is the top dog bite attorney. It was like so clearly you. And so I was really excited when you emailed me back immediately and was eager to hop on and talk to me. I'd love for you to plug where dog owners who have either been a victim of a dog bite or have dogs who could potentially be aggressive, or just have dogs. Everyone listening to this likely has dogs and they want to be safe and they want to make sure they're protecting themselves and their dogs. Why don't you just plug away some assets? I know that you talked about your dogbitelaw.com catalog of all the things that you can find, but it'd be nice for you to just tell everybody where they can find you and get that information.
Sure, sure. And I'll tell you why it's good for me to go over this. Do not get your information from Google or from any AI, because they are putting out a whole lot of wrong information about dog attacks. Where you should go is my website, which is dogbitelaw.com, because the website has been around since the late 90s. It's over 1,000 pages of information, and I designed it from the beginning for dog owners as well as people that were victimized in some way by a dog. So it's for everybody. It's evenly balanced, and I have a lot of stuff there that will help you to defend yourself and to keep out of trouble. Among other things, I've got the insurance companies that will give you canine liability insurance to protect yourself in the event that your dog hurts somebody in some way. I also have written a book called When a Dog is Injured or Killed. It's about the unfortunate but frequent situation where somebody has done something stupid and your dog has gotten injured, and now you're stuck with bills. And you're dealing with not only your dog, which has broken your heart that your dog is hurt, but you're also dealing with the expense of that and the feeling that justice needs to be done. That I've written that book for you. I've written defending your dog in dog court, and that's an important book. It takes you step by step through the process. I've also done a number of things for trainers. I've done a number of things that trainers need. I have a tips and tricks seminar called Avoiding Liability, which is for dog trainers and walkers and rescues and shelters. And it's like an hour and a half video that goes into all the things that you need to know to avoid legal trouble. And it's a must for people. So dogbitelaw.com is where you should start out if you fall into any of these categories or you just want to learn more about this whole problem. And there you will find me, because you can send me messages, and I read every single one, guaranteed. I read every single one, and I respond to all of them, except the death threats, which I get from time to time from people who think that I'm out there prosecuting dogs, which I don't do ever. So, go to dogbitelaw.com, and you'll find me there, and you'll find a bunch of stuff that you need. And thanks you, Tom,
Ken,
for allowing me to get into all that. And thank you for having me on the show. You have a great show. You really do.
Thank you. Yeah, we try. We just, we want it to help people. And so I know that many people who are listening to this, have dogs who, can be pretty spicy. And so it's important to cross your T's and dot your I's and be as proactive as you can and keep everybody safe and know your rights. And this is going to be helpful for people. So thanks again for coming on, Ken. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll talk to you in the next one. Bye, everybody.